They say, see a broad to get that booty yak 'em. Lay her down and smack 'em, yak 'em. Oh, got to be. Yo, shit.
And I say, hey, Lama, hey, how about a little something, for the effort, And he says, there won't be any money. But when you die, you will receive total consciousness.
Bryan, your thoughts on the Sandora 45?
I like the 45. I think it's a great tone machine. It's definitely inspired by the Blues Breaker. It definitely gets that kind of sound. You get a nice breakup in a good Marshall sense of the word when you bridge the channels. I think it's a really cool amplifier, especially if that's the sound that you're looking for.
And I think that's where I'll come in as well. I think the JTM 45 is one kind of a one-trick pony, and I think in this case, which is not a bad thing at all, the Sandora 45 is a loving recreation, as we said already. I think the combination for me that really won out the most was the humbuckers through this amp, kind of the classic configuration of the Les Paul, or in this case, the Collings, I-35.
I actually liked the Strat through it as well. I thought that was a good tone.
Good point.
The
Good
Telly
point.
didn't quite give me the magic in this case.
No, it didn't me either.
So Adam, what'd you think about Sandora's box?
Well, I think that it's an aptly titled amp. Sandora's box kind of meaning like, take off of wink, wink, nudge, nudge, say no more on Pandora's box. There's a ton of tones to get from this thing, but I think it really, really shines in the cleaner modes. Not totally distorted, but not fully clean. The really distorted tones to me, as I think you'll hear on the tape, is a little fizzy, a little almost germanium fuzz.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's definitely on the fuzz side of distortion, and it's clearly present if you play in that upper part of your register on the guitar, especially with single coils. You get a nice throaty, singy type of a sound, but when you get down into the lower register, that fuzz really starts to come out. It certainly feels that way when you're playing with it and you're interacting with the amp as well. It immediately kind of goes into fuzz mode as opposed to a little bit more of a sponge technique that the JTM 45
I completely agree with you.
would have, or even the Sprite, which we'll get to in a little bit.
Yeah. And in this case, I think the single coils shown on this instrument, on the Sandora's box.
I think so too, because I think single coils are much more of a touch-based type of pickup, and they do well with a cleanly voiced amp.
Okay.
It's the Sprite.
It's the Sprite.
The Sprite. Let us do the Sprite.
Interestingly enough, I found the Sprite, even though it had maybe a very simple layout of controls, to be the most demanding to use, but also probably the most rewarding to use.
Yeah, I agree too. It's got a great design. It's basically, to me, very similar to a matchless DC-30. Not only in tone, but also in the layout. What you don't have is two channels, which you would have on a DC-30.
F86 channel. Yep.
Exactly.
Very pleasing rock and roll tone. You could, and I think with any of these amps, I'll say right away that we could get a recording tone pretty quickly. Whether we use single coils or humbuckers in any of the guitars that we used, it responded beautifully to all of them. Whether you're doing lead, whether you're rolling off on your volume and then using your volume as kind of an overdrive structure there for that, I thought it responded really, really well to that. While the Sprite may have a layout that may seem a little daunting, I think that you're going to get, and Bryan, you're going to agree with me on this, I'm pretty sure, you're going to get the most variety of tones out of the Sprite. Whether it be you're playing live, recording, whether you're doing anything in between, even in your bedroom, I think this is going to be a very versatile amp for a lot of different players.
One of the unique features on this amp is this three-way switch next to the input. Having it in the first position obviously gives you the most boost. 2 is going to be the darkest, and then 3 is sort of somewhat in between with a little bit of a scooped mid. So that, in addition to the cut and the tone knob, it took a little bit of experimentation to finally dial in a sweet spot. But I agree with you. I think it's probably the most rewarding as far as overall tonal palette is concerned. You can pretty much play this on any gig.
Thanks, Mickey.
Beginning in this episode, we're going to feature a new segment in the AB Tone Show that we're both proud to announce, and that is we're going to do a profile of guitar players of note. This episode, we're going to feature Andy Ellis.
I got to be honest, I'm really excited about featuring Andy Ellis. As a person who grew up in the 80s and started playing guitar in the late 80s and the 90s, Andy was instrumental at Guitar Player magazine, where he had articles, he had witty little comments. I loved reading Guitar Player with Andy Ellis there.
I did too. That was one of the main reasons why I was a subscriber for so many years.
Absolutely. Andy went to Berklee College of Music, but was raised in Europe. He has played a Chapman stick, of which he's kind of almost an innovator on this instrument, on Amy Grant's Grammy-winning record.
Yep, Angels, that was the cut.
Yep.
Andy is currently the senior editor at Premier Guitar magazine. So it's our pleasure to feature Mr. Andy Ellis. So we're here with Andy Ellis, one of my favorite people in the music biz, an amazing baritone guitar enthusiast and player, the senior editor of Premier Guitar magazine, and all-around eclectic hipster of guitar world. So, welcome, Andy.
Thank you, Bryan.
It's great to be here, and it's fun to interview you.
Yeah, because the roles have been reversed before.
That's true.
I've interviewed you several times for my radio show. So.
Okay, so tell me what it was like. I know you grew up Lebanon, outside of Beirut or in Beirut, and in Paris.
Yeah.
And of all that, was it a military thing? Or?
Actually, my dad was a journalist. But the stationing worked out to be about the same. There were like 3 categories of people that traveled all the time: military, diplomatic corps, and journalists. And so it was about typically a 3-year rotation. So I lived in Beirut twice, 2 3-year rotations, and then Paris, and then Bonn, which was the capital of what was then West Germany. And that was where I got into electric guitar. I got my first guitar actually in Paris. It was a classical guitar, and I started taking classical guitar lessons from like a mean old guy who hit my hand with a ruler a couple of times. And when he did that, that was my last lesson. I was just, cantankerous enough, even as a 5th grader, to go,
Right.
I'm not doing this anymore. But I remember buying my first guitar, and oddly enough, I still have it, Bryan. All the other guitars that I've had over the years, they just disappear. You sell them, you refinish them, and they disappear. Terrible. Yeah. But this one guitar I still have. It's not in playable shape right now, but it's a memento. I just had this guitar I got when I was 12. In 64 and 65 and 64 and 65, when I got my first band together, we were listening to the BBC Top 20. It was coming over from England. So all the British invasion stuff I got to hear before it came to the States. So it was like the Kinks and the Yardbirds and the Pretty Things. And Motown, we did hear Motown on the American Armed Forces radio all the time. And in fact on the British radio too. So I was exposed to that. There was one German band though that played Memphis Soul. So
wow.
So just maybe when I was in the 9th grade or something, I'd go see them play. They were called the Guards. Later, I came back to Germany in a couple of when I was in high school, just for the summer, and was actually in a band with the drummer who I used to go see in the Guards. And I was just that young, and this guy was like, man, he was an adult, playing guitar, playing drums in the band. Later, I'm in the band with him, and it's just an amazing thing. Sometimes your passion will take you places that you just kind of go, I can't believe that I'm here. That was one of them.
What was your first concert experience?
It was the Yardbirds with Jimmy Page.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man.
So, I'd seen a lot of bands, and I'd already been in beat shows and stuff, with my own bands playing in Germany, but we were all in it. This wasn't, rock heritage stuff. So here's Jimmy Page, and they roll out of a van really late. We'd all been sitting around for hours because they were, on the road, and he's in this silver lame suit, but it's all wrinkled. You could just sort of smell the road reek on these guys, because they were just,
Yep.
And he set up his Fenders. I mean, he had Fender amps and a painted up Telecaster. That.
Yep.
Yep.
I sure do.
And
So that's what you saw. What an amazing first concert.
Yeah.
I'm so jealous. Mine was Neil Diamond. Let me ask you this. Did you have an inkling of sort of Hendrix pre-67, before the Monterey, before the U.S. got the first look at Janis and Hendrix and everything? I mean, because you were overseas and you were getting that England feed.
I have a pretty cool Hendrix story. The first time I crossed, where Jimi Hendrix crossed into my vision scope, was in Provincetown, Massachusetts, summer of '67, and are you experienced? And just, that
Yes.
fisheye lens, and I just, so I was sitting here in my little army jacket, because I've got my army jacket, my little hippie beads, and these two older dudes were next to me, and this one guy pulls out this thing. He says to his friend, he goes, "Have you heard Jimi Hendrix? This guy is the best guitarist in the world." And I'm, at that point I'd been in a band 2 or 3 years and was very, I'd already seen Jimmy Page, and so I was like very concerned about who this best guitarist in the world might be.
Yeah.
They split, and I buy the record and put it on, and again I was with the drummer. We could understand some of it. We couldn't understand a lot of it because some of it's just. It took a while to wrap our heads around what he was doing, but okay, that's a good starting point.
Name 5 of your all-time favorite guitar players, any genre.
Yes, okay. Well, Jimi Hendrix is just my favorite musician. I mean, the things that he does, and I just never get tired of his sound and his playing. And then there are other guitarists I like through different periods of time. So it's like Kenny Burrell, Midnight Blue. If anybody hasn't heard Midnight Blue, it's 1963. One of the early examples of what I call beatnik blues. But he's very bluesy, but it's bebop sensibilities. But he's got the Latin percussion along with it. So it's Major Holly's playing upright bass, and then there's a trap jazz drum set, but also Latin percussion was one of the first ones to mix that. So the Latin thing is it's not swinging.
Okay.
And it pulls against the ting, 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 ting,
Right.
ting, ting, early Grateful Dead, believe it or not, up until Pigpen died. So up until Europe 72. The last era of the Grateful Dead that I really responded to was the American Beauty, Working Man's Dead thing. Another guitarist, though, that I cannot overlook in my top 5 is Jeff Beck. Jeff Beck, pretty much in his total output, I mean, it's just crazy. Beck is always outrageous, but I saw him, as I mentioned, with the Truth Band. Ricky Waller, I think, on drums, and Ron Wood playing bass, and Nicky Hopkins on piano. I saw that at the Boston Tea Party. And Rod Stewart being a rock and roll singer of the highest order. And there's this one song that I think it's You Shook Me off that Truth album, where they come up, they build up to the end, and then everybody stops except Beck, and he's going beep 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 boop beep, And so I'd grown up with that in high school, just every morning getting up and listening to that. And then when I got to see him play, I was expecting him to go, beep 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 beep, maybe with his pick or something. I wasn't sure. No. Here's what he did. He had a black Les Paul, and he goes beep 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 beep. Then he holds it up. Now he's up at the 22nd fret.
Yes.
Or 21st fret, and then he just loosen, and so he's strong enough. He's wiry dude, I mean, most of us, if we let go a little bit, it's whoop, bam.
Especially with the Paul. Especially with the Les Paul.
Oops.
Yeah. Sorry.
Sorry about that. So you go, and then it's like, okay, that's rock and roll.
Yes. Yeah, that's what he did in the studio too.